Today's presentation is on an autism tool or strategy called the experience story. My name is Mike Woods. I'm the father of triplet boys, all three of them on the autism spectrum, and I'm an autism and inclusion specialist for St. Louis's largest school district. You can find more podcasts and presentations at my website, www.makingroom.net. There was a point in my life where I thought I was in control, that I could produce the outcomes that I wanted. But I discovered very quickly that after we had triplets, and two of those were diagnosed with having severe autism, that I wasn't in control, that I didn't know how to be an effective father. Sure, I could love my boys and I could show them how much that I loved them, but I didn't have a clue about how to teach them the oh so many things that they needed to learn. I didn't ask for this developmental disability to come knocking on my door, but it did. And because it did, I needed to come to terms with a new reality. And that reality was that I needed someone to teach me how to teach them. And God knows that wasn't easy. If you're a parent, you know exactly what I mean, because you probably lived more than your fair share of what I call 36-hour days. Days that feel sometimes like they could just go on forever and ever and ever. Anyhow, so I started out on a course of self-study. I started reading books about teaching kids with autism. Then I started attending workshops. And eventually I started taking college-level courses in autism. Several years later, I would become board certified and then hired by a large school district as an autism and inclusion specialist. Over the course of time, I've had to learn through trial and error the teaching strategies that are most effective with children who have developmental disabilities. At some point along that journey, I discovered that the best learning strategies are often those that are research-based. I want to share one of those research-based strategies with you, a strategy that will help you prepare your child for new life experiences. One of the things in life that I want for my boys, Joshua and Jacob, is to have the same life experiences that I've had. And if they can't have those, then I want them to have as many life experiences as possible, because that is something that will enhance their quality of life. And if you're like me, and I'll bet that you are, you want your child to have the best quality of life possible. And here's the learning strategy, or the autism tool. It's called the experience story. And the experience story isn't something that should be confused with a social story. An experience story is not a social story. Social stories were developed by Carol Gray back in 1991. That's a story-based intervention, but it specifically addresses social situations and teaching social behaviors in the context of social situations. An experience story is much broader than that. An experience story is a story that you use to give kids a preview or a review or an idea of the experience of a new event, whether that event includes people, places, or things, or all three of those. So it has a much broader application than a social story. So you may be asking yourself, why should I learn how to use an experience story? And I don't blame you for asking. Out of all the things that are possible that we can do for our kids, gluten-free, casein-free diets, biomedical interventions, ABA, RDI, hyperbaric oxygen chambers, chelation, and the list goes on. There are so many interventions calling out at us to use with our kids. I think asking why is a smart question. For what purpose would I use an experience story? And it would be this. Experience story solves a problem. It provides a solution for a problem that you have for your child. And I won't only give you one answer to the question why, I'm going to give you three. The first reason why you should consider learning how to use an experience story is because you want to give your child new learning experiences. You want them to be able to meet new people and visit new places and experience new activities. You want to enhance his or her quality of life. And the experience story is a solution on how to do that, because an experience story gives you the flexibility to individualize this story to meet the needs of your child. Look, you know as well as I do that there is no time to waste in trying to remediate some of the challenges that our children face because of their diagnosis. And so for that reason, it's important to make sure that you're using research-based interventions. And currently, there are 11 research-based or 11 established treatments for autism intervention, and story-based interventions, of which an experience story is one of those, is one of the established interventions. A third reason to consider using an experience story is that our children can become anxious about things that are new. Let's face it, change for all of us, newness for all of us, causes some low-level degrees of anxiety because we're not sure what to expect or what's going to happen. For kids who have developmental disabilities, for kids who are on the autism spectrum, for children who have ADHD, for children who have learning disabilities, this unpredictability can be further exacerbated because of the things that are related to the diagnosis. For example, one of those things is executive functioning. Executive functioning basically is the concept that you kind of have a command and control center function in your brain. It's viewed as the conductor of all your cognitive skills, but executive functioning in the brain helps you to manage life tasks of all types. It's what helps you to organize a trip, or to put together a research project, or to prepare and write out a paper for school. Kids who are on the autism spectrum, research studies show kids who have learning disabilities, kids who have ADHD, have executive functioning related issues. Executive functioning impacts working memory, which is the capacity to hold information in the mind for the purpose of completing a task. It impacts planning and organization, which is one's ability to manage current and future-oriented task demands. It impacts organization of materials, or the ability to impose order on work, play, storage places, and things like that. So there's a lot of different areas that executive functioning can impact. And you and I want this. We want our kids to have more life experiences, but if possible, without the anxiety that sometimes accompanies them. And the experience story is one of those tools or strategies that can help you to tackle this area. What types of new experiences can you use an experience story for? Well, life is an adventure, and it's full of new people, new places, and new activities, and an experience story can be used for either one of or all three of these things. So how do you use an experience story? Well, there's a lot of flexibility with how you can use an experience story. You can use an experience story as a previewing tool. Similar to a social story, when you use an experience story as a previewing tool, after you've put your experience story together and before the exposure to this new experience with your child or with your learner, you're going to take several days in advance to start going over or previewing the new experience using your experience story. When we use these at school, or when I use these at home with my boys, I will go over the story at least once a day, sometimes several times a day, days in advance of the new experience that I want to expose my boys to. It's a lot like reading a fairy tale. A lot of you could tell me the fairy tale of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Why? Because you have heard it so many times, you know the story. Well, that's the same concept here with using the experience story as a preview. Another area of how to use the experience story is during the actual experience itself. Remember, we talked a couple of slides ago. A lot of times our kids become a little anxious with change. The unpredictability of things can make one feel a little stressed or a little anxious. An experience story could be used something along the lines of a visual schedule. Now, it's not a visual schedule, but if you have sequenced your story appropriately and in enough detail, you could actually use your experience story during the actual experience itself, in which case you would cover bits and pieces of your experience story with your son or daughter or your learner as the experience is unfolding as a means for them to know what is happening and what is going to happen next. One other area of use for the experience story is using it as a reviewing tool. Now that the experience is over, let's talk about it. Now again, whether that's immediately afterwards or later that night, you want to use your experience story to talk about what did happen. And this experience story is a perfect tool for doing that. Again, you can go page by page, picture by picture, reviewing what happened. This helps to build what they call an RDI, episodic memory, an ability to begin to incorporate or ingrain memories of an experience so that those memories can be used later to recall that this was an enjoyable activity and what happened in this activity. So an experience story could be used as a previewing tool, it could be used during the experience itself, and it could be used as a reviewing tool. Either one of those three or all three of those together. I tend to use it all three combined together because I think the effect is much more powerful. The good news is that making an experience story isn't that hard. There's just a few simple protocols to follow, and then you just want to be consistent about its use. The first step in how to make an experience story is simply this. Identify the new experience that you want your child to have. So you've identified the new experience that you want your child to have. The next step is to identify the sequential parts of that new experience. Let's say that you wanted to take your child grocery shopping. Now, I know that's probably not high on your list. It's not for me. But at some point, our kids need to go through that experience with us because at some point you want them to be independent later in life at being able to purchase their own groceries. And so you pick grocery shopping. What you would do then is simply you're making out a sequential list from the first thing to the second to the third to the fourth and so on, sequentially. What are the series of actions that you go through in the process of getting ready to go and going grocery shopping? You might start out by inventorying what you have in the house as far as food goes. Next, making a list of the things that you don't have enough of. And then third, getting in the car. 4, arriving at the grocery store. And so on and so on and so on. If you're not sure about the sequential parts, then the easiest thing to do is this. Go through that experience yourself and simply write down all of the steps that you took in order to have that experience. That would be your sequential parts. The next thing that you want to do then is to identify the key components of those parts that might affect your child adversely. For example, one of my sons likes predictability. When things are not that predictable, when he doesn't know what's going to happen next, that can have an adverse effect on him sometimes. Give you another example of a different son of mine. Has auditory hypersensitivity. doesn't like loud noises. And so if there were going to be a new experience, it might involve some loud noises. Let's say that we were going to go to our first 4th of July fireworks demonstration. I might want to make sure that a key component of my experience story is the fact that there is going to be loud noises. I want my child to know that up front. Now, to be honest with you, I probably wouldn't go to one of those based on that, but I'm just saying the idea here is make sure that if there are components of this new experience that you think may have somewhat of a negative effect on your child for whatever reason, you're definitely going to want to include those components in this experience story. So far, so good, right? This is not that hard. The next thing that you want to do then is to grab your camera and start taking digital pictures of the sequential parts of that new experience. In other words, from that list that you wrote out of all the sequential components or parts of that new experience we talked about earlier, perhaps going grocery shopping, you would then want to take a picture that represents that component or that part of the sequence. The next thing that you would also want to do is to make sure that you take pictures of the key components that may affect your child. Again, our kids, their visual modality is a strength for kids that are on the autism spectrum. Well, for most people, to be quite honest. So we want to make sure that we're taking pictures of the sequential parts, but also pictures of the key components that may affect your child, because we want to give them some kind of visual reference, which is going to be easier for them to make that connection as to what might happen in this new experience. So far, so good, right? You're doing great. These next steps, not that hard. After you've taken all your pictures, you want to load those pictures onto your computer. Then you want to make sure that you use some type of appropriate software to create your story. For me, because I have Microsoft Office, I tend to use either Microsoft Word or Microsoft PowerPoint to create the experience stories. You'll want to make sure, so you're going to take all these pictures, you're going to put one picture per page with some text. So in other words, you're creating a story, you're creating a book here of a new experience. And because you don't want to have a lot of distraction, you only want to have one picture per page. So it's very easy for a child to know what he or she needs to focus on. And then you're going to include some text with that. What you want to do is that you want to individualize that text. For example, for my son who is on the severe end of the spectrum, if we were going to the grocery store, that was going to be our new experience, the captions under the pictures would probably only contain one, maybe two words. For example, a component of that story, of course, would be getting in the car to drive to the grocery store. With the picture of the car on one page, I might just have the one word car underneath that picture. For my son who has high functioning autism and who's very verbal and can read very well, then I'm going to have a much longer, more complex sentence. Now it's time to get in the car. Might be the text that I put underneath the picture for him. And so you're going to individualize the text for your child, and also the steps in the sequence and those key components that may affect your child negatively. Those are also going to be very individualized also. I can't tell you exactly what pictures to take of grocery shopping because your routine in doing that might be different, and you want to individualize that to your family and for your child. But also those key components that might negatively affect our kids. Things might differ for your child than it does for mine. And so that's going to be an individualized component too, as is the text, as is the actual learning experience that you're going to pick, because you may pick one that is different than the ones that I choose for my kids. So here's the last two steps on making an experience story. You want to print your story out. Make sure that the story, once you print it out, page by page, is in the proper sequential order. 3-hole punch it, and then you can put it in a folder or put it in a binder. If you have access to a laminating machine, I would encourage you to laminate each and every page prior to 3-hole punching it. Then you can 3-hole punch it after you've laminated it, because the story itself, the pages will be much more durable if they're laminated, and it's something that will be able to weather the test of time as you use this over and over and over. Let me just give you a very quick example of an experience story that I used for a little guy who was on the high functioning end of the autism spectrum. And he was invited to a birthday party at a bowling alley. And I'll just quickly go page by page by page to give you an idea of what an experience story looks like. Again, very simple process, but very useful. First page, it's Trey's birthday. Had I been using this particular story for someone who was on the moderate to severe end of the spectrum, I might have just had the word Trey. Second page, he is having a birthday party. If, again, I was using this for a child who was on the moderate to severe end of the spectrum, I might have just had the words birthday party. Notice that this birthday party is taking place at the bowling alley. Again, these pictures are pictures from the actual location and the actual people who are going to be involved in this experience. The party is at the bowling alley. Again, if I was using this for someone who's on the moderate to severe end of the spectrum, I might individualize the text by simply just having bowling alley, possibly the word just bowling. When the party is finished, you will go bowling. Again, someone on the moderate to severe end of the spectrum, I just might have put the word bowling as the individualized text under this picture. First, you will get your shoes. Next, you will get a bowling ball. Then you will go to your bowling lane. You will put your ball on the ramp. The ball will make a loud crash. This is the slide that I had to put in there for this particular child because of auditory sensitivity. He was averse to some loud noises, and I wanted him to know ahead of time that there was going to be some loud noises in the process of bowling. Obviously, as you all know, the bowling ball hits the pins and you multiply that by the number of lanes in the bowling alley, it can get fairly loud. You can buy something to drink. You can play a game. After bowling, you will go back home. Again, if I was making this for someone on the moderate or more severe end of the autism spectrum, I might have had the words go back home, or after, go home, or possibly just the word home. Again, these are laid out sequentially to give someone an idea of the experience and the sequence by which things will happen. Some slides were incorporated in here to take into consideration some sensitivities or possible problem areas. Anyhow, that's the use of a experience story in a nutshell. I would encourage you to use these. Again, as you can see, very simple and very easy thing to use. It's just a matter of constructing one. And once you've constructed one, you can use it time and time and time again. Anyhow, that concludes this presentation. Appreciate you taking the time to listen. God bless and have a great week.